I'm Atticus Scott, former Kentucky State Representative, and you're joining me today on State Live Streams.
We will continue to provide.
Hey y'all, I'm Atticus Scott, former Kentucky State Representative, and you're joining me today on State Live Streams.
We will continue to provide.
Kentucky State Representative, and you're joining me today on State Live Streams.
Carla, thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation and talking about what is happening here in this city. But we're going to get to that right here on Stay Live Streams. Tell me a little bit about who you are and the organization you're with.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for this kind of work. I think getting community engaged in what's happening is so critical. So, like you said, my name's Carla. I feel like I was put on the path very, very early. On my mother's side, my family was involved in the anti-Nazi movement in Holland, and actually hid people under their floorboards during the Nazi occupation. And my mother woke my father up, who then ended up being one of the few white people marching for open housing here in Louisville. And the first picture of me at a demonstration is as a 3-year-old in front of the Brown Theater, where black people were not allowed, and they were showing Porgy and Bess. And so it's my father with other African-American protesters, and then there's me at the bottom of the picture with the doll. And so I feel like very early on, I learned that all the talk about, the land of the free and the land of the beautiful and all that didn't mean everyone. And I just, even as a child, I remember understanding that didn't feel right and that was wrong. And so I probably started seriously in high school, getting involved against the Vietnam War and civil rights issues. And the big question for me is, wow, they have so much power on the other side, those at the top and the oppressors. And so the big question I had for myself is, how do we change things? And I got very involved in learning about community organizing and how you bring people together to build people power, to force those at the top to do what we need, to make them stop doing the harm that they do through all the systems and institutions of this country. And
that started back then when and those. I'm sorry, that started years ago.
Yes, years ago. I mean, I've been involved for decades and, tried many different things, but what makes me excited is when we can bring people together and believe that we can make a difference. We're all told you can't fight City Hall. Oh, they're too strong. It's no use. And I have found that those messages are used to keep us quiet, to keep us down, and to not come together for the change that we need. So
I have to agree with that. Just seeing it myself
right?
So many months, so many years.
Exactly. And right now, especially, we're seeing all these divides. And so after the election of the country's first black president, when so many white liberals were like, oh, we're post-racial, we have a black president, it's all over, racism is done. And instead there was a tremendous white backlash, against healthcare efforts. Is he really our president? Is he an American? All of that. And that's when I helped co-found Showing Up for Racial Justice. And it was specifically because if we look at any issue we care about, the issue of the environment, gender justice, racial justice, economic justice, community justice, it's overwhelmingly the demographic of white people who aligns ourselves with those at the top, and things stay the same, even when it hurts us too. You know, I say to people, if we're not protesting environmental racism and pollution in Southwest Louisville, where it's mostly lower income people, African American communities, and then we're wondering why our child in Cherokee Park is struggling with asthma, you know, that pollution comes across the community. We need to care about each other as human beings, and we have a shared interest in making change. And so we founded Showing Up for Racial Justice. It's actually become the largest effort in the history of this country to organize white people around racial justice. And it's huge now. We have about 150 chapters, but we also have hundreds of thousands of members all over the country.
I was just going to ask you that, because I noticed you said Standing Up for Racial Justice, and my introduction to the organization has been Louisville Standing Up for Racial Justice, so there are several chapters across the country.
Oh yes, yes, we have chapters around the country. And
where was it?
It actually started in the South, which we're very proud of. Myself and Pam McMichael, who also lives in Louisville, she was for 12 years the executive director of the Highlander Center, where Rosa Parks got training. And the two of us then brought other people together and said, what are we as white people doing to respond to the tremendous white backlash? And how do we shift more white people to stand with communities of color for the change that we need? And the Louisville chapter, that was in 2009. The Louisville chapter started in 2012. And I remember it was a multiracial room. We brought in a whole mix of people. And I remember the meeting was going on about should we start a Showing Up for Racial Justice chapter in Louisville, and Kalila Collins said, I'm not sure why we're having this meeting. Of course you should do this. You know, she just cut right through it all.
Collins.
She just cut through it all.
I want to, speaking of LSURJ, yes?
Yes.
I want to ask you about an event that took place just weeks ago, actually, on 3rd Street. There was a press conference. Would you say it was a press conference, a rally? Or?
You know, that's a great picture, a great question, Maxwell, because I'm a believer that press conferences should never happen without the people. And so we always do press conferences where we invite the people to be part of it, because those voices are important. And we have to show that we have people, right?
True.
So yes, in Old Louisville, we found out we have something called the Community Defense Network. And it is eyes on the community to watch for instance for ICE activity. And we got a report with pictures from one of our witnesses who saw people being taken out of the building in handcuffs and turned over to ICE. And people didn't know this. I can remember in 2017 accompanying people immigrants who had to get their papers checked. And I would go with them, and we had volunteers, and we made sure the kids had juice and fruit and toys to play with, because sometimes the parents, it took a couple of hours to get things processed. And then the biggest issue was, do they need a ride home? And so when we learned that now people are going in one door free and coming out in cuffs, we decided we needed to expose that.
Necessarily so.
Yes, exactly. And the pictures we had, we were very careful to blur the faces of those detained, because that is their safety and privacy, but we did not blur the faces of these ICE agents. And we turned these pictures over to the media and got some coverage so that people know that's not a safe place. Now, you know, people are told you have to get your papers checked. Maybe some people will decide that's too scary to do that, but we want people to be informed, to know what happens there. And we want the people who care about what's happening to say, whoa, this is happening right under my nose on 3rd Street. What can I do? And get involved.
And that's such an important notion there. And a question I was going to ask you next, actually. But just in a few seconds right after this small break.
The team at Norton West Louisville Hospital would like to invite you to a community update and listening session. In partnership with the Frazier Museum, we are so excited to give you, our community, updates and hear feedback from you as well. Let's talk and bridge the divide. In attendance will be myself, Lorenza Townsend, Chief Administrative Officer for Norton West Louisville Hospital, and Russ Cox, CEO of Norton Healthcare. And now, all we need is you. Join us at the Frazier Museum. The address is 829 West Main Street, beginning at 5:30 p.m. to 7:30 p.m., July 15th. Come and talk to us. Come see me. Come bridge the divide with us. But if you do nothing else, stay live.
People need to get involved. I completely agree. Some people ask, how can they get involved and what can they do? And now I just simply ask you the same question. You know, LSURJ, of course, taking its stance and literally showing up, standing up. What can people do to get involved, and how can, in times like this, with such a tumultuous temperament in the city, centered around these raids and what's happening at that ISAP office, what can people do?
Such an important question. I am finding that there are a lot of people who want to do something and they're unsure of how to engage. So in 2017, during the first Trump administration, we had a system that LSURJ was part of called Alerta Roja, Red Alert. And we started groups of people who would be ready if there were ICE alerts, if we heard that there was an ICE detention happening. This time we learned a lot from that time. We learned about how to create the groups in a better way, who should be the hotline people, etc. And now we have a community defense network that has almost 200 people in it. They've all been trained. People have been trained in documentation of ICE, in intervention in the situation and give people support, in de-escalation, in peacekeeping, and a number of other ways of what we call accompaniment. And this piece is really important. LSURJ was asked by directly impacted communities to take this on because there have been a long relationship of trust. And one of the reasons there's that trust is people know that as white people, we understand that our role is not to tell people what to do or decide what's best for impacted people. Our part is to say, what is needed? How can we help? And so our people are trained very seriously in that this is not about white saviorism. This is not about rescuing people. It's not about telling people what they need to do. It's about accompanying people around their decisions. So for instance, if ICE comes to someone's door, we have a 24-hour hotline run by people who are fluent in Spanish and have access to other languages, because we're also working, for instance, with the Somali community, with the Haitian community, and 24/7, a call comes in, the hotline operator then calls the team that is on call. So teams have particular weeks. They're on call a week at a time. And that team then alerts all their members, and they have to go with at least 3 people and document what's happening, try to talk to the people if they can about not opening their doors and that they have the right to not talk to ICE, etc. And then provide a connection with groups that provide the services. You know, we're not the ones that are the legal support, for instance, or the ones who help somebody find housing. That is very importantly done by immigrant and refugee organizations who are trained to do that work, but we provide a connection to those resources. So we're working together on providing people resources and how to help them if their loved one is taken.
Now, those resources, you mentioned a hotline. What is that number, if you remember off the top of your head?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I can get that for you.
I appreciate it very much. Question for you. Outside of LSURJ, I know there were organizations in the city who were holding programs, classes around Know Your Rights, or I believe Sabes tus derechos, I
Mm-hmm.
believe.
Yeah.
What are some of those organizations that you can think of or remember right now that people may want to look up or reference or whatnot?
Yeah, great. So right away after the election, we formed a very broad coalition called Coalition for Immigrant Support,
Mhm.
and that includes probably about 20, 25 organizations maybe
Wow,
that do various things.
wow.
That includes like Kentucky Refugee Ministry and
Mhm.
the ACLU and Louisville Surge and various faith spaces and Americana and on and on. And those groups are all part of this broad coalition. And a number of them do the Know Your Rights, especially La Casita Center provides Know Your Rights trainings in the community and in Spanish, which is very important.
Very important.
They're also working with JCPS to get more of those trainings happening at JCPS and other institutions that need to know about that. LSURJ does Know Your Rights trainings as well. We recently did one for the Bartenders Association
Oh,
with a
wow.
bunch of union folks. And it was very interesting. And I love this story because what happened was bartenders decided that their colleagues might be in danger
Mm,
or somebody who works in the back room might be in danger. And they said, we can't have ICE come and us not know how to defend our coworkers.
exactly.
So we need a training. And that was very moving to me that it was the workers themselves who said, we want to be trained.
And I think that's a very important notion too. It's something I'm seeing here, there, a bit of everywhere. Either whether it's businesses, groups, friends, or whatnot, people are wanting to support and be there
Yes,
for their immigrant friends, immigrant neighbors, and immigrant employees,
yes,
which is showing that there is an overwhelming amount of care
yes,
for protection, an
yes,
overwhelming amount of care for help,
yeah,
if you will,
yeah,
which speaks volumes on the need to really, for lack of a better word, stand up, show up,
yeah.
and senses of for racial justice.
Hmm.
Excuse me, I got a bit of a frog in my throat today. I wanted to ask you about a protest or rally that took place weeks ago, the No Kings rally.
Hmm.
I strongly attended and whatnot,
Hmm.
and there were a plethora of speeches in the beginning, and there were a plethora of speeches in the end. And just a universal question, what were your feelings on the rally itself?
I think it's really exciting that that many people are getting in the streets
Hmm.
and saying, no to what's coming down on folks. I mean, there were all kinds of people from all walks of life.
Hmm.
I think the signage showed, how the grassroots part of it was very, very strong. Um, I believe in protests, street protests,
Yeah,
but they can't be the only thing.
of course.
Street protests in and of themselves are not a strategy. They have to be connected to other efforts, like, for instance, showing up if people are being detained by ICE.
Exactly.
Like, for instance, pushing City Hall to make sure that the police do not collaborate with ICE. That was something that Louisville Surge worked on back in 2017, along with Mi Gente Louisville, which
Hmm.
was a Latinx led organization here in Louisville. And we worked together, met with the Metro Council members,
Hmm.
and were able to push them to pass legislation that separated the police and ICE. And the reason that's so important is the police, if ICE is questioning somebody, they can't necessarily detain somebody, especially if they don't have a judicial warrant. But what they do is say, hey, LMPD, can you help us with the situation down here?
Hmm.
Then that person ends up in the jail, and the jail notifies ICE to come and get them before they're released. And so that separation is very, very important. It's also important because, for instance, um, if there is domestic abuse, for instance, a woman might be afraid to call the police because she thinks they're going to collaborate with ICE and then her family members will be in danger. So pushing City Hall has to happen. Legislation has to happen. We worked on making sure JCPS did not allow ICE to come on the premises. And this election, we did that in 2017, won that policy. And then we went, yes, thank you. It's hard to win things in this city. And then we went back and met with school board members this time around to say, are you aware of this policy that the ICE is not allowed on, and have teachers been told about this policy? We were in communication with JCTA, which sent it out to all the teachers to know that if ICE comes, they are to call legal and they are to call the principal, and ICE can't come in and pick up a student, which is just a horrible way to pressure the parents to come and turn themselves into ICE by taking somebody's children, So street protests is an important part of change making, but I'm a believer that we need many approaches linked together. And so I always ask at a protest, were people given the next steps they can take to get involved? And
Yes.
too often that does not happen. Now we had a table, Louisville Surge had a table, and we actually signed people up to become community defenders. And there's a training coming up in soon. It can be found on our Facebook page if people are interested in getting trained to be community. If people are interested in getting trained to be community defenders, they can find that on the LSURJ Facebook.
Yeah, I think that's a very important step, the next step, having something ready to go. I was aware of the No Kings rallies in a few different cities throughout the country, and that was a very common and very similar worry and concern that either literally or metaphorically, people not being given a pamphlet or a note or a booklet as to say, hey, here's something you can do next, here's what you can focus on next. You're ramped up, you're ready to go, you feel good, now here's where you can put that energy towards something helpful and useful. I know for a fact it happened it was said in 3 or 4 cities, but I can only imagine and be sure that there's many cities across the country that same sentiment was felt. Now, I want to ask you just one more question actually of you, but before we do that, I want to take just one more break and we'll come right back and get to that. And again, before we do take the break, thank you again, Carla, for joining me.
Thank you.
Through every note, every performance, the arts connect us. The arts connect us through joy and through awe, bridging cultures and generations. From intimate theaters to the grandest stages, the arts bring us together, reminding us that we're never truly alone. When we experience the arts, we experience each other. Kentucky Performing Arts. The arts connect us.
Once again, Carla, thank you for joining me again. And I wanted to ask you, simply, do you have anything that you'd like to add that I haven't asked or that wasn't brought up yet?
I really appreciate, Maxwell, when you were saying earlier that people are ready to be involved. One of the things that we launched recently is a program called Neighbors Keep Neighbors Safe. And we are actually going door to door and talking to people about how they feel about poor people being targeted in the, taking away the homeless camps, houseless camps, how they're feeling about immigrant people being taken away, how they're feeling about attacks on any community that is under attack, including always the Black community by policing, etc. And we're actually having those conversations with people door to door.
Wow.
And then we ask them to take the step of putting a yard sign in their yard that says, "We are all neighbors." And it's a way for people to signal that they believe everyone matters, that we're all part of that we. And specifically what we're trying to do with that is, we are in times right now where we're being pitted against each other, turned against each other, made afraid of each other. So we're trying to encourage this culture of connectiveness, of taking the risk of being there for each other. And we're specifically talking to white people who are the least likely to be targeted by any of this. But in neighborhoods where people also struggle to pay their mortgage, or to get out of school debt, or to pay their rent, or to pay their health care, people who we feel have a mutual interest or a shared interest in joining with Black and Brown and Indigenous communities for the longer range change we need. SURJ believes in doing our part to bring white people into a multiracial movement. Change has always been led in this country by especially the Black community, but also Brown and Indigenous communities, unions, oppressed people. And so if we're not coming together, so our work with white people is to say, hey, you care about any of these issues? Then let's come together and show what are you going to do? And the yard sign is the first point, but then we follow up with them and invite them. We're inviting them all to this community defense training, for instance. I imagine a bunch of them will be like, what? But, it's a beginning. I believe there's so many people out there who, if we just knock on their doors, they're waiting for a way to be involved. And I've knocked doors for decades, and I find those people. So
I love it. It's beautiful. Carla, thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much for this. Really appreciate you.
And I hope as we continue on, not only today, the next day, the next week, I think of this meeting, this conversation, hopefully it sparked several flames of education, encouragement, and we can spread those flames like a wildfire throughout this entire country. Beautiful.
As Baldwin said, the fire next time.
Indeed. You take care, Carla.
You too.
Thank you again.
If you do nothing else.
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 Stay live.